The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains as Katherine Wallace crouched behind a weathered wagon wheel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The stagecoach robbery had gone terribly wrong, not that she'd wanted any part of it. Her stepfather and his gang lay dead in the dirt, leaving her alone with their crimes and the approaching hoofbeats of what could only be a lawman or worse. It was 1878 in the unforgiving Arizona Territory, and Katherine had never felt more abandoned. At 22, she'd spent her life being dragged from town to town by a man who'd married her mother for convenience and kept Katherine for labor after her mother died of fever 3 years ago. "Come out with your hands high," a deep voice commanded. "I won't ask twice." Katherine closed her eyes, gathering whatever courage remained in her trembling body. She stood slowly, raising her hands, dust clinging to her threadbare dress. The rider dismounted, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He wasn't wearing a badge, but everything about him, from his weathered Stetson to his confident stance, spoke of authority. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I didn't shoot anyone," she said immediately. "My stepfather, Jasper Harding," the man finished, glancing at the bodies. "Been tracking him and his boys for 100 miles. His gaze returned to her, assessing. "You're not what I expected to find." "I'm not what anyone expects," Katherine replied, her chin lifting slightly despite her fear. The man holstered his revolver but kept his hand resting on it. "You have a name, Katherine Wallace." "Archer Vance," he replied. "Most folks call me Arch." Katherine watched him survey the carnage around them. "What happens now, Mr. Vance? Are you taking me to jail?" Archer studied her for a long moment. "That depends. Were you part of this?" He gestured toward the overturned stagecoach and the scattered luggage. "No," she answered quickly. "I mean, I was here, but I never wanted." Her voice faltered. "I had no choice." Something in Archer's expression shifted, a subtle softening around his eyes. "Everyone has choices, Miss Wallace." "Not everyone," she countered, years of bitterness seeping into her tone. The sun beat down mercilessly as they stood in that tableau of death and uncertainty. Katherine waited for the handcuffs, the rough handling, the accusations she'd faced her entire life. Instead, Archer Vance surprised her. "There's a town about 15 miles west, Cottonwood Springs. I'll escort you there and we'll sort this out." He moved toward his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Can you ride?" Katherine nodded, though her experience was limited to the few times she'd managed to sneak away from her chores. "Take Harding's mount," Archer instructed, pointing to a dappled gray horse tethered nearby. "We need to move before anyone else stumbles on this mess." As Katherine approached the horse, she hesitated. "Why aren't you arresting me?" Archer's expression remained unreadable. "I've spent enough time tracking men like Harding to recognize when someone's with them by force rather than choice." He adjusted his hat against the glare. "But make no mistake, Miss Wallace, you try to run, and I'll find you." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that Katherine didn't doubt him for a moment. They buried the dead in shallow graves before departing. Katherine worked silently alongside Archer, unable to summon grief for the man who had made her life miserable, yet uncomfortable with her own relief at his passing. As they rode westward, the vastness of the landscape both terrified and exhilarated Katherine. She'd never been truly alone, always under someone's control, someone's watchful eye. "What will happen in Cottonwood Springs?" she finally asked as the sun began its descent. Archer glanced her way. "I have friends there. The sheriff's a fair man. You'll tell him your story, and if I'm right about you, you'll get a fresh start. And if you're wrong," his gaze was steady, "then I'll personally deliver you to the territorial prison at Yuma." They made camp that night beside a small creek, the only sound the gentle burbling of water over stones and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Katherine sat stiffly on her bedroll, watching Archer tend the modest fire. "You should eat," he said, offering her a plate of beans and jerky. When she hesitated, he added, "It's not poisoned, Miss Wallace." "I know that," she snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. She took the plate with a mumbled thanks. As they ate in silence, Katherine studied her companion. Archer Vance moved with economy, nothing wasted or flashy. His clothes were worn but clean, his weapons well maintained. He wasn't like the bounty hunters she'd encountered through her stepfather, men who were little better than the outlaws they hunted. "You're not a lawman," she observed. Archer looked up from his plate. "Not officially." "Then what are you?" He considered her question for a moment. "I track people who need finding for various reasons. Sometimes for the law, sometimes for families. And Jasper, who hired you for him? The stagecoach company. Your stepfather robbed 3 of their coaches in the last 2 months." Archer set his plate aside, "But I'd have gone after him regardless." Something in his tone made Katherine look closer. "Why?" "He killed a friend of mine, a driver on the Prescott line." Archer's face hardened momentarily before he controlled his expression. "Get some sleep, Miss Wallace. We have a long ride tomorrow." Katherine lay awake long after Archer had settled on his bedroll, staring up at the endless canopy of stars. For the first time in her life, there was no one telling her what to do, where to go, how to breathe. The realization was as frightening as it was liberating. Morning arrived with a chill that quickly surrendered to the Arizona sun. Katherine woke to find Archer already up, coffee brewing over a fresh fire. "You're quiet when you move," she commented, sitting up and attempting to smooth her tangled hair. Archer handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "A necessity in my line of work." His eyes took in her disheveled appearance. "There's a spot behind those rocks where you can wash up if you'd like. I'll stay by the fire." The small kindness caught her off guard. She mumbled her thanks and took the opportunity to rinse her face and hands in the cool creek water, feeling slightly more human afterward. They rode steadily through the morning, the landscape changing gradually as they approached Cottonwood Springs. Katherine noticed Archer scanning their surroundings regularly, alert to any sign of threat. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked after the 3rd time she caught him studying the horizon. "Always," he answered simply. "Jasper Harding had associates. Word travels fast out here." Katherine felt a chill despite the heat. What kind of associates? The kind that won't take kindly to his death, even if they didn't particularly like him. Archer gave her a sideways glance. "Is there anything you should tell me? Anyone who might come looking for you specifically?" She thought about it, mentally cataloging the various criminals who had passed through their camp over the years. "No one who cared enough to track me down. I was just Jasper's stepdaughter, useful for cooking and cleaning." Something flashed in Archer's eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "How long were you with him?" "Since I was 12. He married my mother when we were in Kansas City." Katherine stared at the horizon. "She died 3 years ago, fever. After that, he made it clear I was staying with him until I'd worked off my debt." "Debt? For raising me?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Though all he did was drag me along while he robbed and cheated his way across 4 territories." Archer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. By mid-afternoon, the distant outlines of Cottonwood Springs appeared on the horizon. Katherine's anxiety grew with each mile, uncertainty about her future making her stomach churn. "What if your sheriff friend doesn't believe me?" she finally asked. "He will." Archer's confidence was unwavering. "Sheriff Mitchell has a good sense about people. And if he doesn't," Archer turned to look at her, his expression softening slightly, "then I'll vouch for you." Katherine blinked in surprise. "You would do that? Why?" "Because I believe you're telling the truth." He adjusted his hat. "And everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves." Cottonwood Springs wasn't large by any measure, but to Katherine, who'd spent most of her time in makeshift camps and ramshackle hideouts, it seemed substantial. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses. People moved about with purpose, nodding greetings to each other. Katherine felt painfully conspicuous as they rode down the center of town. Her dress was dirty and worn, her hair a tangled mess despite her efforts. Beside her, Archer sat tall in his saddle, seemingly untroubled by the curious glances they attracted. They stopped in front of a modest building with "Sheriff" painted above the door. Archer dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post before coming around to assist Katherine. She hesitated before accepting his offered hand, unused to such courtesy. Sheriff Mitchell was a graying man with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly gentle manner. He listened to Archer's account of finding Katherine at the stagecoach robbery site, then turned his attention to her. "Miss Wallace," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "I'd like to hear your side of things." Katherine took a deep breath and told her story. She spoke of her mother's marriage to Jasper Harding, their constant movement to stay ahead of the law, and the years after her mother's death when she became little more than a servant. She didn't embellish or make excuses, simply stated the facts as they were. When she finished, the sheriff exchanged a long look with Archer before nodding slowly. "I believe you, Miss Wallace," he said finally, "and I don't see any reason to hold you responsible for Harding's actions." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "The question is, what happens now?" Katherine stared at her hands. It was a question she'd been avoiding. With no money, no skills beyond basic cooking and sewing, and no connections, her options were severely limited. "Martha at the hotel might need help," Sheriff Mitchell suggested. "She's been complaining about being short-handed." Archer cleared his throat. "I have a proposition if you're amenable." Both Katherine and the sheriff looked at him with surprise. "My sister runs a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town," Archer continued. "She's expecting a child in a few months and could use help with the household. It would be a safe place for Miss Wallace to stay while she figures out her next steps." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Eliza's good people, that might work." Katherine stared at Archer, confusion and suspicion warring within her. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Archer met her gaze steadily. "Everyone needs someone to give them a chance, Miss Wallace. I'm offering you one." She searched his face for hidden motives and found none. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Sheriff Mitchell interjected with a smile. "Eliza Vance is one of the finest women in the territory. You could do a lot worse." Katherine realized she had little choice. Without money or connections, her options were to accept charity or resort to means she'd sworn never to embrace. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." That evening, after a meal at the town's modest restaurant, paid for by Archer despite her discomfort, Katherine found herself riding beside him again, this time toward his sister's ranch. The sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in fiery oranges and deep purples. "Your sister," Katherine said, breaking the silence. "Will she mind taking in a stranger?" Archer's lips curved slightly. "Eliza has been taking in strays her whole life. You'll be in good company." "I'm not a stray," Katherine replied sharply. He glanced at her. "No, you're not. You're a survivor." The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, silenced her. The Vance Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. A split-rail fence enclosed a corral where several horses grazed in the fading light. A woman appeared on the porch as they approached, one hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. She was younger than Archer by a few years, with the same storm-gray eyes and an open, friendly face. "Bringing home more trouble, Arch?" she called, though her tone was light. Archer dismounted and helped Katherine down before addressing his sister. "Eliza, this is Miss Katherine Wallace. She's had some difficulties and needs a place to stay." Eliza Vance studied Katherine briefly before her face broke into a warm smile. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here." She extended her hand. "Come inside. You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal." Katherine found herself ushered into a cozy home that smelled of freshly baked bread and pine. Daniel Coleman, Eliza's husband, was a tall, quiet man who accepted his wife's explanation about their guest without question. Their easy acceptance was so foreign to Katherine that she found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for demands to be made, for the true cost of their hospitality to be revealed. But as the evening progressed, no demands came. Eliza showed her to a small but clean bedroom, provided towels and a borrowed nightgown, and directed her to a bath that had been prepared in a private corner of the house. Later, clean and fed better than she had been in years, Katherine sat awkwardly in the Coleman's sitting room. Archer had remained for dinner but was preparing to leave, declining his sister's offer to stay the night. "I have business back in town," he explained, settling his hat on his head. "I'll check in on you tomorrow, Miss Wallace." Katherine followed him to the porch, needing to ask the question that had been bothering her all evening. "Mr. Vance," she said quietly, "I don't understand why you're doing this. What do you want from me?" In the silver moonlight, Archer's expression was difficult to read. "Not everyone has an ulterior motive, Miss Wallace. In my experience, they do," he sighed, a sound of resignation rather than irritation. "Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." He tipped his hat and descended the porch steps, mounting his horse with practiced ease. Katherine watched him ride away, confusion and wariness still churning inside her. She didn't trust kindness, it had always been a prelude to betrayal in her experience. Eliza joined her on the porch. "He's a good man, my brother," she said softly. "Better than he thinks he is." Katherine glanced at her. "You don't know anything about me." "I know Archer brought you here," Eliza replied simply. "That tells me enough for now. The rest you can share when you're ready." She placed a gentle hand on Katherine's arm. "For tonight, just know you're safe here." The sincerity in the woman's voice was almost more than Katherine could bear. She nodded stiffly, afraid that if she spoke, the burning in her throat might transform into tears she'd spent years refusing to shed. That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets, Katherine tried to process the dramatic change in her circumstances. 24 hours ago, she'd been watching her stepfather plan another robbery. Now he was dead, and she was free, but freedom, she was discovering, carried its own kind of terror. The next few days established a routine that was both foreign and comforting. Katherine helped Eliza with household tasks, from cooking to mending to tending the vegetable garden. Daniel Coleman worked the ranch with the help of 2 hired hands, managing a modest herd of cattle and several fine horses. True to his word, Archer returned the following day. He brought supplies from town, including fabric that Eliza insisted was for making Katherine some proper clothes. When Katherine tried to protest, Eliza waved her objections away. "Consider it payment for your help around here," she said firmly. "I'm not exactly light on my feet these days." She patted her growing belly with affection. Archer stayed for dinner, his presence both unsettling and oddly reassuring to Katherine. He didn't speak much, but she felt his attention on her throughout the meal, assessing, evaluating. After dinner, he asked if she would walk with him to check on his horse. Katherine hesitated before agreeing, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "How are you settling in?" he asked as they crossed the yard toward the barn. "Your sister and her husband are very kind," Katherine answered carefully. "But you're still waiting for the trick." It wasn't a question. Katherine stopped walking. "Wouldn't you, if your entire life had taught you that kindness always came with strings attached?" Archer turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Yes, I probably would." He studied her for a moment. "What was your life like before Harding?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't remember much. My father died when I was very young. My mother and I moved around, taking work where she could find it." Katherine stared at the distant mountains. "She was a laundress mostly. It was a hard life, but she cared for me." And after she married Harding, Katherine's jaw tightened. "He showed his true nature once he had us far from anyone who knew us. My mother was just another possession to him, and I was." She trailed off, unwilling to revisit those memories. "I'm sorry," Archer said quietly. "No child should live that way." "I wasn't a child for long," Katherine replied, "not with Jasper Harding as a stepfather." Something fierce flashed in Archer's eyes, quickly controlled. "No, I expect not." He gestured toward the barn. "Come, I want to show you something." Inside, he led her to a stall where the dappled gray horse she'd ridden from the robbery site was contentedly munching hay. "This is Smoke," Archer said, stroking the horse's neck. "I thought you might want to keep him." Katherine blinked in surprise. "Keep him? I can't afford a horse." "You rode well on the way here. He's a good mount, steady and smart." Archer shrugged. "Consider him restitution from Harding's estate." Harding's estate consisted of stolen goods and blood money, Katherine said warily. "This horse was legitimately purchased in Prescott 6 months ago. I checked." Archer's expression softened slightly. "Every person needs the freedom to leave a situation if it becomes necessary. A horse gives you that freedom." Katherine stared at him, trying to understand his motives. "Why do you care what happens to me, Mr. Vance?" Archer was quiet for a long moment. "I've seen what happens to people who have no options, Miss Wallace. Sometimes they survive. Often they don't. Either way, it changes them." His gaze was steady. "You've survived. I'd like to see what you become when you have choices." The horse nudged Katherine's shoulder as if endorsing Archer's words. She reached up tentatively to stroke its velvety nose. "Thank you," she said finally. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just take good care of him." Archer cleared his throat. "I'll be away for a week or so. Sheriff Mitchell has a job for me up near Flagstaff." Katherine felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Oh, of course. Eliza and Daniel will look after you, and Smoke here will need regular exercise." He hesitated, then added, "When I return, perhaps I could show you some of the trails around the property." It wasn't quite an invitation, not exactly a promise, but it hung between them like a possibility. Katherine nodded. "I'd like that." As they walked back to the house, Katherine realized something had shifted between them. A small measure of trust had been established, fragile but present. The week of Archer's absence passed more quickly than Katherine expected. She fell into the rhythm of ranch life, finding satisfaction in productive work freely chosen rather than coerced. Eliza proved to be not just kind but clever and funny, sharing stories of growing up with Archer that revealed a side of him Katherine hadn't glimpsed. "He was always the serious one," Eliza said as they hung laundry on the line. "Even as a boy, our father used to say Arch was born 40 years old." "What happened to your parents?" Katherine asked, then immediately regretted her curiosity when a shadow passed over Eliza's face. "Raiders," she said simply. "I was 14, Arch was 19. He had just started working as a deputy in our town. He came home to find—" She trailed off, hands stilling on the sheet she was hanging. "He tracked them for 3 weeks. When he came back, he wasn't the same." Katherine thought of the controlled, watchful man she was coming to know. "I'm sorry," Eliza smiled sadly. "He took care of me, made sure I finished my schooling, kept a roof over our heads." She rested a hand on her belly. "I've tried to convince him to settle down, find some happiness for himself, but he seems content with his work," Katherine offered. "Content isn't the same as happy." Eliza gave her a thoughtful look. "He seems different around you, though, more present." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Eliza just smiled and changed the subject. Each day, Katherine rode Smoke, gradually expanding her explorations of the ranch and its surroundings. The freedom of movement was intoxicating after years of confinement. She discovered she had a natural affinity for riding, the connection with the powerful animal beneath her bringing unexpected joy. On the 8th day after Archer's departure, Katherine was returning from a ride when she spotted a rider approaching the ranch. Even at a distance, she recognized Archer's distinctive silhouette. Without conscious thought, she urged Smoke into a trot to meet him. Archer raised a hand in greeting as she approached. "Miss Wallace," he called. "I see you and Smoke have become acquainted." Katherine reined in beside him, suddenly aware of her impropriety in riding out to meet him so eagerly. "Mr. Vance, welcome back." She gestured to the horse beneath her. "He's a fine animal, thank you again." Archer's eyes took in her changed appearance, the borrowed clothes that now fit properly thanks to Eliza's sewing skills, the healthy color in her cheeks from days spent outdoors, the way she sat confidently in the saddle. "The ranch seems to agree with you," he observed. Katherine smiled, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar on her face. "I've never stayed in one place long enough to feel settled before. It's nice." They rode side by side toward the house, Archer asking about her week and listening attentively to her responses. Katherine found herself speaking more freely than she had in years, describing her explorations of the property and her growing friendship with Eliza. "She's been teaching me to cook properly," Katherine admitted. "Apparently, there's more to it than throwing whatever's available into a pot." Archer chuckled, the sound warm and unexpected. Eliza always did have strong opinions about food. The easy conversation continued through dinner, with Eliza and Daniel clearly pleased to have Archer back. Katherine observed the siblings' interaction with fascination, their obvious affection, the shorthand of shared experiences, the gentle teasing. It was everything a family should be, everything she'd never had. After the meal, when Daniel had retired to his study and Eliza was resting, Archer asked Katherine if she'd join him on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant coyote. "Did your work go well?" Katherine finally asked. Archer nodded. "A missing child. Found him with his grandfather, who didn't approve of the boy's stepfather." A shadow crossed his face. "Can't say I blame him, given what I learned about the man. The boy is safe now." "Yes, with his mother." Archer glanced at her. "Sheriff Mitchell asked about you." Katherine tensed slightly. "Oh, he's satisfied that you had no part in Harding's crimes." Archer's voice was reassuring. Your name has been cleared officially. Relief washed over her. Thank you for believing me, for helping me. Archer shifted in his chair. I promised to show you the trails when I returned. Are you free tomorrow morning? The invitation sent an unexpected thrill through her. Yes, I'd like that. The next morning dawned clear and mild. Katherine dressed in the practical riding skirt Eliza had made for her, excitement bubbling beneath her calm exterior. When she stepped onto the porch, Archer was already waiting, both their horses saddled and ready. I thought we'd ride to Stillwater Canyon, he said. There's a waterfall there that few people know about. They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the terrain. Archer proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out plants and wildlife, explaining the history of the land. Katherine found herself relaxing in his company, asking questions freely, even sharing observations of her own. The canyon was a revelation, a hidden paradise of towering red rocks, spring-fed pools, and as Archer had promised, a waterfall that cascaded down a stone face into a crystal-clear pool below. It's beautiful, Katherine breathed as they dismounted near the pool. One of my favorite places, Archer admitted, securing the horse's reins to a nearby juniper. I found it by accident years ago, tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on ranch stock. They sat on sun-warmed rocks beside the pool, sharing the simple lunch Eliza had packed for them. Katherine found herself studying Archer when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the capable hands that could be both lethal and gentle. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Vance? She ventured after they had eaten. He looked at her with mild surprise. You may ask, I may not answer. Why did you become a tracker? After what happened to your parents, I mean, Katherine hesitated. Eliza mentioned it briefly. Archer was quiet for so long that Katherine feared she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. When our parents were killed, I was a deputy. As Eliza probably told you, I tracked the men responsible, brought them to justice. His gaze turned distant. Afterward, I realized I had a talent for finding people who didn't want to be found. It seemed like a useful skill. Is that the only reason? Archer looked at her directly. No, truth is, I couldn't stay in that town with those memories, and I discovered that movement served me better than stillness. Katherine nodded, understanding perfectly, until Eliza settled here. She married Daniel 5 years ago. I helped them establish the ranch, but he shrugged. Roots don't suit me. Because of what happened to your parents, or because you haven't found a reason to grow them? The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps both, he admitted after a pause. What about you, Miss Wallace? Now that you're free to choose, what will you do? Katherine stared at the waterfall, considering. I don't know, I've never had the luxury of planning for a future before. She drew her knees up to her chest. I'd like to stay here for a while if Eliza and Daniel will have me, learn more, save some money after that. She shook her head. It's strange to have possibilities. Possibilities can be overwhelming, Archer agreed, but they're preferable to the alternative. They fell silent again, the sound of the falling water filling the space between them. Katherine found herself intensely aware of Archer's presence beside her, not threatening as men had always been in her experience, but somehow reassuring. We should head back, Archer said eventually. Eliza will worry if we're gone too long. As they prepared to leave, Katherine impulsively reached out to touch Archer's arm. Thank you for showing me this place. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Archer nodded, a small smile softening his features. You're welcome, Miss Wallace. The ride back was companionable, their conversation ranging from books they had read to places they had seen. Katherine discovered that beneath Archer's reserved exterior was a man of intelligence and surprising wit. More than once, he drew a laugh from her, each one feeling like a small victory over her past. Upon returning to the ranch, they found Eliza in distress. Her husband had been thrown from a horse while checking fences and had broken his leg. The ranch hands had brought him back to the house, where he lay pale with pain. Archer immediately took charge, sending one of the hands for the doctor in town while he helped make Daniel comfortable. Katherine assisted Eliza, whose worry for her husband was compounded by her advanced pregnancy. Everything will be fine, Katherine assured her, squeezing her hand. Daniel is strong and the doctor will be here soon. The next several hours were a flurry of activity. The doctor arrived, set Daniel's leg, and prescribed bed rest, a challenging prospect for a man accustomed to physical labor. As night fell, the immediate crisis passed, but a new problem emerged. With Daniel incapacitated, the ranch work would fall largely to the two hired hands who couldn't manage everything alone. "I'll stay for a while," Archer decided after conferring with Daniel. "At least until you can hire additional help." His announcement sent an unexpected wave of relief through Katherine, followed by confusion at her own reaction. She told herself it was merely concern for Eliza and Daniel, nothing more. The next week established a new routine. Archer took over management of the ranch operations, working alongside the hands from dawn until dusk. Katherine divided her time between helping Eliza with household tasks and assisting with lighter ranch work, feeding animals, collecting eggs, and tending the vegetable garden that provided much of their food. Each evening they gathered for dinner, the four of them forming an unlikely family unit. Katherine found herself looking forward to these meals, to Archer's quiet recounting of the day's work, to the easy banter between the siblings, to the sense of belonging that was slowly, tentatively taking root within her. One evening, as Katherine helped Eliza wash the dishes, the pregnant woman suddenly clutched her belly and gasped. "Eliza, what's wrong?" Katherine asked, alarmed. Eliza took a deep breath. "Just the baby moving. He's very active today," she grimaced. "Though I wish he'd be a bit gentler with his mother." Katherine helped her to a chair. "Can I get you anything? Water?" "No, I'm fine." Eliza smiled reassuringly, then her expression grew thoughtful. "Katherine, may I ask you something personal?" Surprised at the role reversal, Katherine nodded. "What are your feelings toward my brother?" The question was so unexpected that Katherine nearly dropped the plate she was drying. I respect him greatly. He's been very kind to me." Eliza's knowing smile made it clear she wasn't fooled by the evasion. "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching, and how he looks at you." Heat flooded Katherine's cheeks. "You're mistaken. Mr. Vance sees me as a charity case, nothing more." "My brother has never brought a woman to my home before," Eliza said quietly. "Not once in 5 years." Before Katherine could respond, the door opened, and Archer himself entered, looking tired but satisfied after a long day's work. The conversation was set aside, but Eliza's words lingered in Katherine's mind. That night, unable to sleep, Katherine slipped outside to sit on the porch swing. The moon was nearly full, bathing the yard in silver light. She tried to sort through her confused emotions, to understand the strange warmth that filled her chest whenever Archer was near. The creak of the door startled her from her thoughts. Archer stepped onto the porch, looking equally surprised to find her there. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," Katherine assured him. "I couldn't sleep." Archer hesitated before gesturing to the space beside her on the swing. "May I?" She nodded, inexplicably nervous as he settled beside her. They swung gently for a few moments, the silence comfortable yet charged with something unspoken. "Daniel is improving," Archer finally said. "The doctor says he's healing well." "That's good news. Eliza has been worried." Archer nodded. "She always worries about everyone but herself." He glanced at Katherine. "She's grown fond of you, so has Daniel." "I've grown fond of them too," Katherine admitted. "They've been kinder than I deserve." "Kindness isn't about deserving," Archer said quietly. "It's about recognizing humanity in others." Katherine looked at him, struck by the simple wisdom of his words. "You're a surprising man, Archer Vance." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "How so? You track criminals for a living, yet you see the good in people. You carry weapons with ease, yet you're gentle with those who need protection." She shook her head slightly. "I've never met anyone like you." Archer was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the moonlit yard. "I've made my share of mistakes, Miss Wallace. Judged wrongly, acted in haste, carried grudges too long." He looked at her. "I'm trying to do better." There was something in his expression that made Katherine's heart beat faster. "I think you're succeeding," she said softly. The air between them seemed to thicken. Archer's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before he straightened, breaking the moment. "It's late," he said, standing. "You should get some rest." Katherine nodded, both disappointed and relieved. "Good night, Mr. Vance." He paused at the door. "Archer," he said. I think after all this time you might call me Archer, she smiled. Good night, Archer. Good night, Katherine. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her into her dreams. The next day brought unexpected visitors to the ranch, Sheriff Mitchell, and a well-dressed gentleman who introduced himself as James Harrington, a representative of the Stagecoach Company. Miss Wallace, Harrington said after introductions had been made, I've come with some news that may interest you. They gathered in the sitting room, tension evident in Archer's posture as he stood near the window watching the proceedings. During the investigation into Jasper Harding's activities, Harrington explained, we discovered certain documents among his possessions. One was a bank draft for a considerable sum held in trust for his wife and stepdaughter. Katherine frowned. I don't understand. It appears that your stepfather, despite his criminal activities, maintained a legitimate account for his family's security. Harrington withdrew an envelope from his coat. This draft represents your portion of those funds as his only surviving relative. Katherine stared at the envelope in shock. There must be some mistake. Jasper never saved money, he gambled or drank everything he stole. Sheriff Mitchell cleared his throat. We verified the account, Miss Wallace. It's legitimate. Perhaps Harding wasn't entirely the man you knew him to be. Archer stepped forward. Or perhaps he was setting aside funds for a future he didn't live to see. His expression was unreadable. Either way, the money is rightfully yours, Katherine, Harrington nodded. $5,000 to be precise, enough to provide you with options for your future. Katherine felt dizzy. The sum was more money than she'd ever imagined possessing. With it, she could go anywhere, do anything. The freedom was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. After the visitors departed, Katherine sat on the porch, the bank draft clutched in her hand. Archer joined her, his usual composure slightly strained. Congratulations, he said. You're a woman of means now. Katherine looked up at him. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to decide immediately. Archer's voice was carefully neutral. Where would you go if you could go anywhere? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Katherine searched his face, looking for some indication of what he wanted her to say. I don't know, she answered honestly. I've never thought beyond survival before. Archer nodded as if her answer confirmed something for him. The money gives you choices. That's a good thing, is it? Katherine stood, frustrated by his detachment. What if I don't want to leave? His eyes met hers, a flash of something hope, fear. Crossing his features before he controlled his expression. Why would you stay, Katherine? You have the means to start fresh anywhere you choose. Because maybe I've found something here worth staying for. The words escaped before she could consider them, hanging in the air between them. Archer's gaze intensified. What have you found? Katherine's courage faltered. Safety, kindness, friendship, all true but not the complete truth. A shadow passed over Archer's face. All good reasons, he said, his voice even. You should discuss your options with Eliza. She'll have good advice. He turned to leave and Katherine felt the moment slipping away. Archer, she called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, she said, for everything you've done for me. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed. You don't need to thank me, Katherine. I didn't do anything special. Before she could argue, he walked away, leaving her with the distinct feeling that something important had just been lost. The following days were strained. Archer threw himself into ranch work, rising before dawn and returning after dark, minimizing his time in the house. Katherine tried to engage him at meals, but his responses were polite and distant, a return to the formal man who had found her at the stagecoach robbery. Eliza noticed the change. What happened between you two? She asked Katherine as they prepared vegetables for dinner. Katherine sighed. I'm not sure. Ever since the bank draft arrived, he's been different. Eliza considered this. My brother has spent his life helping people move on to better circumstances. Perhaps he assumes you'll do the same. I haven't decided anything, Katherine protested. Have you told him that? He hasn't given me the chance. Katherine set down her knife in frustration. Besides, what reason do I have to stay? Your husband will recover, you'll have your baby, and Archer will return to his tracking work. Eliza gave her a pointed look. Are you really asking me, or are you trying to convince yourself? Before Katherine could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. They rushed to the window to see Archer riding in, supporting one of the ranch hands who was slumped in his saddle, blood staining his shirt. The next hour was chaotic. The hand, Miguel, had been gored by a bull while repairing a fence line. Archer had found him and brought him back, but the wound was serious. Katherine helped Eliza prepare bandages and hot water while Archer and Daniel, hobbling on his healing leg, tended to the injured man. When the doctor arrived, he confirmed what they feared: Miguel needed surgery and proper medical care. Archer volunteered to take him to town in the wagon, where the doctor could better treat him. "I'll come with you," Katherine said impulsively, "to help with Miguel on the journey." Archer looked like he wanted to refuse, but couldn't find a logical reason to do so. "Very well, we leave in 10 minutes. The trip to town was tense, Archer driving the wagon with focused determination while Katherine sat in the back with Miguel, monitoring his condition. They spoke little beyond necessary communications about the injured man. At the doctor's office, while Miguel was being treated, Katherine finally confronted Archer in the waiting room. "Have I done something to offend you?" she asked directly. Archer looked startled by the question. "No." "Of course not. Then why have you been avoiding me?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been busy with the ranch." "Archer," Katherine stepped closer. "Please don't lie to me, not after everything." He met her gaze, his own conflicted. "I'm not lying, I've been busy. And deliberately staying away from the house when I'm there," she pressed. "Barely speaking to me when we're in the same room." Why? For a moment, Archer's composure slipped, revealing a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Because it's better this way," he said quietly. "Better for whom?" "For you." He turned away, staring out the window at the dusty street. "You have money now, Katherine. You can go anywhere, be anyone. Why would you want to stay in Cottonwood Springs?" The pain in his voice gave her courage. "What if I've found something here I've never had before?" Archer turned back to her, his expression guarded. "And what's that?" Katherine took a deep breath. "A place where I feel like I belong, people who care for me, work that matters." She hesitated, then added softly, "You." Archer stared at her, surprise evident in his features. "Me? Yes, you." Katherine's voice strengthened with conviction. "The man who gave me a chance when no one else would, who taught me that kindness doesn't always come with conditions. Who showed me a waterfall and made me laugh and never once made me feel like I was damaged goods." Archer seemed frozen, his eyes locked on hers. "Katherine," he began, but she wasn't finished. "I've never had anyone believe in me before, never had anyone really see me until you did." Katherine's hands were trembling, but her voice remained steady. "So yes, I have money now, I have options. But why would I leave the first place I've ever felt like I might belong?" The silence that followed her speech seemed to stretch endlessly. Archer's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex, a mix of hope and caution. "You deserve better than a life in a small town with a man who spends half his time tracking criminals across the territory," he finally said. "Shouldn't I be the one to decide what I deserve?" Katherine countered. Archer took a step toward her, then stopped, as if restraining himself. "What are you saying, Katherine?" "I'm saying I don't want to leave," she said simply. "Not unless you want me to." The doctor's door opened before Archer could respond, breaking the moment. They spent the next hour making arrangements for Miguel's care, the conversation between them suspended but not forgotten, on the ride back to the ranch. With Miguel settled at the doctor's, the tension between them had shifted from avoidance to anticipation. Katherine waited for Archer to speak, to acknowledge what had passed between them, but he remained focused on the road ahead. It wasn't until they were nearly at the ranch, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber, that Archer finally broke his silence. "I never expected you," he said quietly. Katherine looked at him, waiting. "In my life, I mean." Archer kept his eyes on the road. "I've spent years helping people move on to better things. It's what I do." He glanced at her briefly. "I never expected to find someone I didn't want to see leave." The simple admission made Katherine's heart race. "And yet you've been pushing me away." "Because that's what I thought was right." Archer's hands tightened on the reins. "You've had so few choices in your life, I didn't want to be another person making decisions for you. So you decided I should leave without asking me what I wanted." Katherine couldn't help but smile at the irony. Archer had the grace to look chagrined. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather contradictory." They were approaching the ranch now, the lights of the house visible in the gathering dusk. Archer pulled the wagon to a stop some distance from the house, turning to face Katherine fully. "What do you want, Katherine?" he asked, his voice low and earnest. "Not what you think you should want or what others expect you to want. What do you truly desire for your future?" Katherine met his gaze steadily. "I want to stop running. I want to build something real, something that lasts." She took a deep breath. "I want to see if what I feel for you might grow into something more, given time and space to breathe." Archer's expression softened, hope replacing caution in his eyes. "And what is it that you feel for me?" "I'm not entirely sure," Katherine admitted. "I've never felt it before. But it makes me want to stay, to see what might develop between us." She searched his face. "If you want that too." Archer reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I want that more than I've wanted anything in a very long time." The simple touch, the sincerity in his voice filled Katherine with a warmth that chased away the evening chill. "Then perhaps we could explore this, together, day by day." Archer's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, unburdened. "Day by day," he agreed. When they finally arrived at the house, Eliza took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. Daniel, seated in the parlor with his leg propped up, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night, Katherine stood on the porch, gazing at the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She heard the door open behind her and knew without looking that it was Archer. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Too much to think about," she admitted. Archer nodded. "I understand. It's been an eventful day." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, shoulders nearly touching. Katherine was acutely aware of his presence, of the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to accompany him. "Katherine," Archer said finally, turning to face her, "there's something I need to say." She looked up at him, noting the serious set of his jaw. "What is it?" "I've spent my life tracking people, reading signs, following trails," he began. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. But with you," he shook his head slightly, "with you I find myself uncertain, afraid of misreading the signs." Katherine waited, sensing he needed to find his own words. "I know we've agreed to take things day by day, and I respect that," Archer continued. "But I want you to know that my feelings for you are significant, more than I expected to feel for anyone." The simple honesty of his declaration touched Katherine deeply. "I'm afraid too," she admitted. "Everything about us is new territory for me. I don't know how to navigate it." Archer's expression softened. "Perhaps we can learn together." "I'd like that." Katherine smiled up at him. "Though you should know I can be stubborn." A chuckle escaped him. "I never would have guessed." Their laughter faded into a charged silence, eyes locked in the moonlight. Katherine felt herself swaying toward him almost imperceptibly, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Archer noticed. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Katherine answered by closing the distance between them, her hand coming to rest lightly on his chest. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Archer bent his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Katherine responded with equal gentleness, her heart racing at the foreign but welcome sensation. When they parted, Archer's eyes were dark with emotion. "I've been wanting to do that since the waterfall," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "Because you weren't ready." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "And because some things are worth waiting for." Katherine turned her face into his palm, overwhelmed by the tenderness of his touch. "I've never known kindness," she admitted softly. "Not true kindness, without conditions or expectations." Archer's expression was solemn as he looked down at her. "Then I'll teach you every day," he promised, "for as long as you'll let me." The weeks that followed were a revelation for Katherine. True to his word, Archer showed her kindness in countless ways, small gestures that required no acknowledgement, moments of consideration that spoke louder than grand declarations. He respected her independence, encouraging her to ride Smoke farther each day, to explore the territory around the ranch. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and grip until she could hit a target consistently. When she expressed interest in the ranch accounts, he showed her Daniel's system without condescension, answering her questions and valuing her observations. In turn, Katherine found herself opening up, sharing stories of her past that she'd never spoken aloud before. Archer listened without judgment, offering comfort through his steady presence rather than empty platitudes. Their courtship progressed slowly, each step forward a conscious choice rather than an inevitability. They rode together, worked together, shared quiet evenings on the porch talking long into the night. Physical affection came gradually, hands brushing while passing tools, shoulders touching as they sat side by side, kisses that grew more confident but remained respectful. Eliza watched their developing relationship with evident satisfaction. "You've been good for him," she told Katherine one afternoon as they prepared for the baby's arrival. "I haven't seen him this content since we were children." "He's been good for me too," Katherine replied. "I never thought I could trust anyone the way I trust him." "Will you stay then?" "Permanently?" Eliza asked. Katherine considered the question. "I think so. I've been thinking of investing some of my money in property nearby." She smiled shyly. "To build something of my own while still being close to everyone." Eliza smiled knowingly but didn't press for details. Late summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light across the land. Daniel's leg healed completely, allowing him to resume his duties on the ranch. Archer began taking tracking jobs again, but only those close enough to return within a few days. On a crisp October morning, Eliza went into labor. The house became a flurry of activity, with Daniel alternating between panic and determined calm. Katherine took charge of the household, sending one of the hands for the doctor and preparing everything needed for the birth. Archer stayed close to Daniel, keeping his brother-in-law occupied with ranch matters to distract him from his worry. When the doctor arrived, he confirmed that everything was progressing normally, but that first babies often took their time. The labor lasted through the day and into the night. Katherine remained by Eliza's side, wiping her brow, offering encouragement, holding her hand through contractions. Archer and Daniel waited in the parlor, each passing hour increasing their anxiety. Just before dawn, a lusty cry broke the tense silence of the house. The doctor emerged from the bedroom, smiling broadly. "Congratulations," he announced to Daniel. "You have a healthy son." The joy that filled the house was palpable. Daniel, after seeing his wife and child, emerged with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Archer embraced his brother-in-law, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Later, when Eliza was resting and the doctor had departed, Katherine found Archer standing on the porch, staring at the sunrise. "Are you all right?" she asked, joining him. He turned to her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I was just thinking about family," he said. "About how it can be lost and found and created anew." Katherine nodded, understanding. "Your nephew is beautiful. Eliza and Daniel are blessed." "Yes." Archer hesitated, then reached for her hand. "It made me think about our future." Katherine's heart skipped. "Our future, if you want one. Together, I mean." Archer seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know we agreed to take things day by day, and if that's still what you want," Katherine interrupted him by rising on her tiptoes and pressing a kiss to his lips. When she pulled back, his expression was a mix of surprise and hope. "I want a future with you, Archer Vance," she said softly. "I've known it for some time now." Relief washed over his features. "I was thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, "about that property you mentioned investing in." "What about it?" "There's a parcel of land adjacent to Eliza and Daniel's with a small house that needs work but has good bones." Archer met her gaze steadily. "I was thinking of buying it, of settling down, taking fewer tracking jobs, building something permanent." The implication was clear, but Katherine needed to hear it directly. "Are you asking me to join you in this plan?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Katherine." Archer's voice was deep and sincere. "To build a life with me, to create our own family, to let me show you kindness every day for the rest of our lives." Tears filled Katherine's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Archer gathered her in his arms, his kiss filled with promise and devotion. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I never imagined this," Katherine admitted. "When you found me at that stagecoach robbery, I thought my life was over." "Instead, it was just beginning," Archer said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "For both of us." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church with Eliza, Daniel, and their newborn son as witnesses. Sheriff Mitchell attended, along with a handful of townspeople who had come to know and respect Katherine during her months in Cottonwood Springs. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue, her hair adorned with wildflowers that Archer had gathered that morning. He stood tall and proud beside her, his usual reserve replaced by evident joy as they spoke their vows. "I promise to protect you, respect you, and cherish you," Archer said, his voice steady. "To be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, and to show you kindness every day of our lives together." Katherine's voice trembled slightly as she responded. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever lies ahead, to build a home and a life with you, to trust in your goodness and to share mine with you. I promise to remember each day that love is a choice we make, and to choose you always." The small house Archer had mentioned became their project over the winter months. They worked side by side repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, painting walls, and planting a garden that would bloom in the spring. Katherine used some of her money to add modern conveniences, a proper stove, comfortable furniture, shelves for the books they both loved. Archer took fewer tracking jobs, choosing only those that allowed him to return home within a week. When he was away, Katherine divided her time between their home and helping Eliza with her infant son. She discovered a talent for bookkeeping and began assisting several local businesses with their accounts, earning her own income and respect in the community. Spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and new beginnings. Katherine stood in their garden, planting seeds that would become summer vegetables, when she heard Archer's horse approaching. He had been away for 5 days, tracking a missing child who had wandered into the hills. She straightened as he rode into the yard, noting the tired lines of his face, but also the satisfaction in his eyes that told her the job had ended well. "Welcome home," she called, removing her gardening gloves. Archer dismounted and crossed to her in a few long strides, gathering her in his arms as if they'd been separated for months rather than days. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Did you find the child?" He nodded. "Safe and sound." Got turned around chasing a rabbit and found himself in a box canyon, scared but unharmed. Katherine smiled up at him. "Another family made whole because of you. Speaking of family." Archer's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," Katherine teased. He laughed, a sound she never tired of hearing. "I'm considering taking Sheriff Mitchell's offer." Katherine's eyes widened. For months, the sheriff had been trying to persuade Archer to become his deputy, arguing that Cottonwood Springs was growing and needed more law enforcement. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I know how much you value your independence." Archer's gaze was steady. "I value you more and our future together." His hand moved to rest lightly on her abdomen. "All of our future." Katherine caught her breath. "How did you know?" "I didn't," he admitted, his expression shifting to wonder. "But I suspected. You've been tired lately, and Eliza mentioned you couldn't stomach coffee last week." His eyes searched hers. "Am I right?" Katherine nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Reynolds confirmed it yesterday." "I was going to tell you when you returned." She covered his hand with her own. "We're going to have a baby, Archer, in late autumn." The happiness that transformed his face was everything she could have wished for. Archer lifted her gently, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly serious. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine assured him, tears of joy pricking her eyes. "Are you?" Archer cupped her face in his hands. "Katherine Vance, you have given me a life I never dared to imagine, a home, a purpose, and now a child." His voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, I am happy beyond words." That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues, Katherine leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you remember what you promised me that night on Eliza's porch?" she asked. "After I told you I'd never known kindness." Archer's arm tightened around her. "That I'd teach you every day," Katherine smiled. "You've kept that promise every single day, and I always will," he vowed, pressing a kiss to her temple. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for the baby, for their home, for their future together. Katherine thought about the frightened young woman she had been, crouching behind a wagon wheel expecting the worst from life, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here to this man, this home, this profound sense of belonging. "What are you thinking about?" Archer asked, noticing her contemplative silence. Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best ones if we're brave enough to keep going." Archer nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And if we're fortunate enough to find people who see us for who we truly are. And love us anyway," Katherine added softly. "Because of who you are," Archer corrected, "not despite it." As stars appeared in the velvet sky above them, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not just a physical home, but a place of belonging in Archer's heart. The kindness he had promised her that night had transformed into something even more precious. A love built on respect, trust, and the daily choice to see the best in each other. 5 years later, Katherine stood on that same porch, watching Archer teach their 4-year-old son Thomas how to groom Smoke, now a venerable but still spirited mount. Their 2-year-old daughter, Eleanor, played nearby, arranging pebbles in patterns that made sense only to her. Katherine's hand rested on her rounded belly, where their third child grew steadily. Cottonwood Springs had prospered and expanded. Archer had indeed become Sheriff Mitchell's deputy, and 2 years later had been elected sheriff himself when Mitchell retired. Katherine managed the accounts for several businesses in town and had started a small library in a corner of the general store, sharing her love of reading with the community. Eliza and Daniel lived just over the hill, their son now joined by twin girls who were Eleanor's favorite playmates. The two families shared Sunday dinners, celebrated holidays together, and supported each other through life's inevitable challenges. As Katherine watched her husband patiently demonstrating to Thomas how to brush the horse's coat in the direction of the hare, she thought about the long journey that had brought them here. The pain of her early years had not disappeared, but it had been transformed by Archer's steadfast love and the family they had created together. When Archer looked up and caught her watching, his smile was as warm and genuine as the day he had first told her he loved her. He whispered something to Thomas, who nodded seriously before continuing his task, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand joining hers on her belly. "Wonderful," Katherine answered truthfully. "Everything is perfect." Archer's eyes, still as gray as a summer storm, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I was just thinking about the day we met." "Were you now?" Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Reminiscing about finding me at a crime scene," he chuckled. "Thinking about how my life changed course that day, though I didn't know it yet." His expression grew serious. "I was a lonely man, Katherine, though I wouldn't have admitted it then, tracking people who needed finding but never staying, never connecting. And now," she prompted softly, "now I have everything a man could want." Archer drew her close. "A woman who challenges and supports me, children who amaze me every day, work that matters, a community that feels like home. And kindness," Katherine added. "Don't forget kindness." "I haven't forgotten," Archer assured her, his lips brushing hers gently. "I promise to teach you every day, remember?" Katherine smiled against his lips. "And now you've taught our children too." Archer's gaze moved to Thomas, still diligently grooming the horse, and Eleanor, singing to herself as she played. "Our children," he repeated, wonder still evident in his voice after all these years. "Our family." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Katherine leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the life they had built together. From the ashes of her past, through Archer's steadfast kindness and her own courage to trust, they had forged something beautiful and enduring, a love that grew stronger with each passing day. A home filled with laughter and learning, a legacy of compassion that would continue through their children and beyond. "I love you, Archer Vance," Katherine said simply, his arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Katherine Vance, today, tomorrow, and every day that follows." Their lives weren't perfect, no lives ever are. There were arguments and misunderstandings, financial worries and health scares, the ordinary challenges that all families face. But through it all, they kept their promise to each other, to choose love daily, to offer kindness freely, to build together what neither could have created alone. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.